Faces of Stone is live. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and others, to episode 5, I believe. We're 5 episodes into our Star Wars series. And I hear the delightful sound of my own voice echoing back at me, telling me to mute the YouTube page, where our chat is on fire. There's already one comment there from marc-anthony Macon, which cues me to introduce my colleagues and good friends on the Faces of Stone panel. First of all, I would like to invite a warm welcome for my father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate, Mr. Marc-Anthony Macon. Hello, Marc-Anthony.
Man, that was a wild time when I was rooming with your father's cousin's former roommate, father's cousin's brother's former roommate.
I don't know very much about it, but I know that's why I'm here today.
All right.
And last but not least, ever since she was left on the doorstep of a monastery somewhere in the Ford Galaxy, she's been going at ludicrous speed. Say hello to Amanda Sisk. Hello, Sisk.
Hello. I'm happy to be here.
Wow, you sound very happy to be here. My name, as it has been for my entire life, is Noah Diamond. And today we're doing one of our theme episodes. As our legions of regular viewers know, this Faces of Stone series has mostly been an episodic chronological leap through the Star Wars saga. But occasionally we take a break from the chronology of the story in order to do a special theme episode and dwell on a favorite topic. This one is May the Schwartz Be With You, Spaceballs, and Other Spoofs, in which we discuss the world of galactic parody, and specifically all the fun people have had with Star Wars over the years. So let's get into it, guys. The first Star Wars parody that I want to discuss is one of the very first Star Wars parodies ever in existence, and that's Hardware Wars.
Yes, Hardware Wars.
Hardware Wars, which was made in 1978. It was a very fresh parody at a time Star Wars had just happened.
And we can assume that the moment, from the moment that the makers of Hardware Wars saw Star Wars, they started working on Hardware Wars, and it came out a year later.
Yeah, and I was thinking when we were preparing for this episode, and I was trying to figure out where I first encountered Hardware Wars, I found I've sort of always been aware of it. And almost as long as I've known about Star Wars, I've known about this strange little homemade, but very clever and charming short parody of it. And from reading, I figured out that there was a home video release called Hardware Wars and Other Film Farces, which included other things like Bambi Meets Godzilla, other sort of pre-internet viral videos that everyone seems to have seen at some point, or at least many do. This one was written and directed by a man named Ernie Facilius and produced by Michael Weiss. And it's a beloved cult classic in its own right.
It is adorable. I mean, Wookiee Monster is really cute. And I mean, Ham Salad, you can't do better than that for a name.
Calling Han Solo Ham Salad.
Ham Salad is great, yeah.
I had never seen it before. And I loved it. I really loved it. I really got my geek on and loved it. They had to figure out how to make the firecrackers go off and all that stuff. And it was just really fun to think about how they made it.
Yeah.
And Ham Salad, the actor, I mean, that's, and the way they dubbed over all the lines, it was so great. It was so great. I loved it.
The waffles. I love the waffles opening.
Yes.
The waffle irons.
Yeah. Yeah. For anyone who might not know, the low-budget solution Hardware Wars finds to the problem of spaceships and spacecraft is to just use household items, irons and toasters flying through space with visible strings, and it's all extremely charming.
Well, and of course, the original effects crew for episode 4 really did something fairly similar. They just had a lot more time and money to work on it.
It's not.
They really kind of threw those ships together from stuff from hardware stores and model shops, and
yeah, it's very much the Star Wars aesthetic. I mean, it's a sort of do-it-yourself version of what Spaceballs eventually does, which is take the technology that made Star Wars possible and use it to make fun of Star Wars. And what could be more delightful? I just want to say Augie Ben Doggy once.
Yes.
That's what made me laugh the hardest. That is what I had to stop.
Augie Ben Doggy.
Augie Ben Doggy. Brilliant. I love it. Love it. Won me over.
The name of the Obi-Wan character in Hardware Wars is Augie Ben Doggy. It also helps a lot that the structure of Hardware Wars is it's really a parody of a trailer for a movie. And it has this very legitimate voiceover by Paul Frees, voiceover legend who voiced, among other things, the original actual Star Wars trailer. So it sounds very legitimate. And when he says Augie Ben Doggy for the first time.
And the thing about the trailer format is that they don't have to, the scenes can stop. You know, it's like Monty Python, you just stop it when it stops being funny or stops working. And that's what's great about this, and that they didn't try to make, you know, a whole 30-minute short film.
It mercifully was plotless.
Yeah.
It's just excellent. And it may well be the first Star Wars parody on film. Certainly the first that I'm aware of. I think with regard to parodies of Star Wars, we must give credit and perhaps shed a tear this week for Mad Magazine, which the news has just broken that Mad, in its print form anyway, is essentially discontinued now. It's shifting into a sort of reprint mode to fulfill its subscription obligations. And I guess there may be some annual Mad content coming out, but essentially Mad Magazine, the foundational text of American pre-adolescence, is no more. I'm sure Mad probably did have what really must have been the first Star Wars parody to reach people, just because Mad had the vehicle for it. I remember reading in reprint form Star Roars and The Empire Strikes Out, and all of those early Mad parodies. Also something called The Force and I, which was Mad's musical Star Wars parody with songs that had lyrics set to familiar songs from other musicals. Come to the Galaxy to the tune of Cabaret, things like that.
It's really a tragedy that Mad is going away. And I had just renewed my subscription a couple of years ago, and then they revamped, and I thought that meant that they really kind of had a future in mind, and I guess they did not. It's sad.
Yeah, I guess that revamp was a last-ditch attempt, but I think Mad is one of those things that is a casualty of the culture that it helped to create. I mean, we're living in a Mad world now in so many ways, and the thing we used to have to get from Mad Magazine is now available all over the place.
It's a bit unavoidable, yeah. Right. But like Alfred E. Newman is just an icon. I'm hoping that even if Mad Magazine goes away, we still kind of have that character around as a way to remind us of that specific benchmark in our comedy world history.
Yeah, my feeling is that Mad remains a kind of valuable and evocative brand name, and DC Comics, which owns it, is going to do something with it. But Mad Magazine, the way it arrived in our mailboxes when we were 10, that is definitely a thing of the past. Any thoughts on either Hardware Wars or Mad before we move on to Spaceballs?
Well, before moving on to Spaceballs, actually, can we talk about Bill Murray's Star Wars song on
Yeah, we could do that now. Absolutely. Take it away.
Well, this was something that I remember as a kid seeing and being really delighted by. And so I watched it again now just to see if it was that delightful, and it wasn't.
That's what I
it was not. It was not very it was much better in my memory.
Yes.
I think it's one of many Saturday Night Live things where the one classic moment that everyone remembers is great. The actual improvised lyrics to the Star Wars theme music as Bill Murray performs them, that is funny. But that's a 15-second bit in a sketch that really isn't that funny and doesn't really go anywhere. It's Murray's lounge singer character, Nick Winters.
Yes.
Performing in a ski lodge.
Performing in the powder room at Meatloaf Mountain.
To be specific, yes. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of indelible and iconic. Bill Murray standing there going, Star Wars. We all think of that when we hear the Star Wars music. That moment is great, but yeah, the structure around it is not
kind of embarrassing.
Yeah,
kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
I mean that's often my reaction to Saturday Night Live is, oh, I want to be with you guys, but oh, you just didn't quite get there.
While we stop, Lloyd, I want to remind anybody who might try to watch that I am playing bingo with my peers here, and so every time they say something that I've got written down on my bingo sheet or something like it, I will ring the bell and mark it off and see if one day I get bingo.
Okay. Have you gotten a bingo yet? You've not gotten a bingo yet.
No, I will never get a bingo.
Okay. You might get a bingo. We will get you a bingo by the end of this thing.
Okay.
But bingo or not,
also while we're stopped and before we move on to Spaceballs, Star Wars character or sea creature, you guys? Monkey face prickleback.
Sea creature.
Prickleback. Star Wars creature.
It is a sea creature. It's a fish that can breathe air. Okay, so Spaceballs.
How can I go on now? Oh, Spaceballs.
When did everyone watch Spaceballs? Did you guys see Spaceballs in the theater?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I saw Spaceballs, maybe not opening day, but close to it, and probably opening day. I mean, I think it came out around Christmas, right? When was it released?
Spaceballs came out in 1987. You're going to want to know more specifically than that, aren't you? Spaceballs was released on June 24th, 1987.
Oh, June. Okay.
So I was 10 years old when Spaceballs was released. I guess that means both of you were 11.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very personal movie for me, which sounds ridiculous to say about something like Spaceballs. For me, it was a revelation. And even aside from the actual value of Spaceballs and its actual content, which we'll get to me, it was mind-blowing to see it when I was 10. It was, I thought, the best Star Wars movie I'd ever seen. It had everything Star Wars had, and it was really funny. It was also, for years, I thought that it was my introduction to Mel Brooks, who assumes a godlike status in my world. I've realized since then that it wasn't my first exposure to him as a performer, because he had been not only in the Muppet movie, in a very memorable cameo, but I also knew him from the Free to Be You and Me record.
Oh, right.
The sketch that he did with Marlo Thomas, where they were babies.
He's a baby, yeah.
But Spaceballs was the first Mel Brooks movie I ever saw. And therefore, it was my first exposure to so many funny ideas, including just the notion that it was inherently funny to be Jewish, which being Jewish was something I had kind of struggled with for my first 10 years. And Spaceballs just opened up this revelation to me that Jewish was intrinsically funny, and that made me comfortable with it. And I've been comfortable with it ever since. In the movie, of course, the Force is called the Schwartz. May the Schwartz be with you. And when I was 10, I could not understand why that was funny. And I kept asking my mother, why is the Force called the Schwartz? What is that about? And my mother didn't want to tell me that part of the reason that's funny, I'm assuming she chose not to tell me, that part of the humor is because Schwartz is slang for penis, Yiddish slang for penis. But that's not even mainstream Yiddish, because it's not in the Ultimate Guide, The Joys of Yiddish, which gives the definition of Schwartz or Schwarze, which is a derogatory or perhaps in some cases merely descriptive term for people of African descent. Schwarz means black in German. But, it does have this other phallic meaning, and that's part of why it's funny. But what my mother told me to explain it, why it was funny, is that, you know, it's funny because it's Jewish. Schwartz is a Jewish last name, and taking this mystical thing and giving it this very commonplace sort of colloquial American first generation Jewish name, that's funny. And that too was a revelation to me. If we just cross out a word here and there and replace it with something that sounds Jewish, you'll get a laugh. And you know what? It works.
I believe you. This is, for the record, the first time I have not had "I'm Jewish" on bingo.
Well, this is the one though. We're talking about the
I know. I didn't think about it. I don't remember when I saw this movie for the first time, and I'm quite sure I was shown it by a group of male friends that I had. You know, when I was a kid, I had a bunch of male friends in the neighborhood, and through them I learned about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Chinatown and
wow, okay.
Howard the Duck, things like that.
Oh.
One of these things is not like the other.
And so I saw all these things through them, and this is, I'm pretty sure, probably came through them. And it had the, as I keep saying, the 80s problem, which about women, which even at the time, as a girl, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was not funny about it. And you know, you get told you don't have a sense of humor if you don't laugh at dick jokes, which I didn't. So I think I was, I mean, I've never been, and I'm still not a very good audience for this movie. And it doesn't fill me with nostalgia. It kind of fills me with like, okay, you can make a dick joke. That's okay. I don't know. I think it's a little bit lazy in a lot of places. Though there were several times I laughed very, very, very loud. But
okay, so I initially saw this with my friend Ben Phillips. It was like our parents were friends, and so we would, you know, stay at each other's places sometimes and hang out. And we went to see Spaceballs, and laughed our asses off. Like, and we thought it was hilarious and repeated it forever and ever. That said, I think by the time that I got to be about 16 or 17 and watching it again, I felt much more the way that you do, Amanda. I felt like it was kind of lazy and, you know, not as clever as it thought it was, and just kind of a lot of base humor. And there were some really funny things. And also, like, Spaceballs is like, I know that for a fact that it's the first time I ever heard the word ludicrous. So thanks for that, if nothing else. I got ludicrous to use right after that.
I think both of you make excellent points, and it's undeniable. I mean, if you remove the gauze or if I remove the gauze of my 10-year-old perception of the movie, yes, there's no doubt about it. It's less than a perfect comedy, and I think the Mel Brooks film output tends to have these problems. Spaceballs, objectively speaking, is probably a mid-level film for him. But even his best work on film tends to have these problems.
His best work being Robin Hood Men in Tights, right?
Well, I feel he is one of the great creative geniuses of the 20th century, but his films are not the best example of that. You know, and if I were...
You're not telling me that Dracula Dead and Loving It isn't a work of genius, Noah Diamond.
You're naming all the Spaceballs ones, which are inarguably inferior. But as far as spoof movies go, I mean, I do think Blazing Saddles is a kind of masterpiece. Spaceballs is very much an attempt to do with science fiction fantasy movies what Blazing Saddles does with Westerns. And there are other kind of superior Mel Brooks movies like Young Frankenstein and High Anxiety, which do the same thing with their genres. But I think Mel Brooks got kind of trapped in the spoof movie and kept turning them out because Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, both released in 1974, by the way, were so successful and popular. But to me, his great work is the 2000-Year-Old Man albums and the stage musical version of the producers. And if I were trying to convey to somebody why Mel Brooks is great, I would show those to them before we ever got to any of these movies. And Spaceballs comes at a weird time for him too. Like, he's now 10 years after his great parody films. And Spaceballs does feel like a somewhat lesser effort than the best of those. On the other hand, it is clearly superior to the ones that marc-Anthony just mentioned. The Dracula one and the Robin Hood one, and also Life Stinks. So that's all true, but it also comes at a strange time for Star Wars. 1987, it's 10 years after the original Star Wars. It's 4 years after Return of the Jedi. People were really kind of done with Star Wars. And at the time, it seemed sort of passé to be parodying Star Wars at all. It didn't seem that way to me. I was 10 and I was, very happy about it. But in retrospect, I see how weird it was in 1987.
I remember, by the way, getting a poster that said, and it was a long, very like oblong kind of poster that had Star Wars written out on it, and it said the first 10 years. And to me, at that time, that seemed like an eternity. Like, we were talking about ancient history, when Star Wars came out. 10 years ago. It came out 10 years ago. And they're already just mocking it in the theater. That was the other thing. My friend Matt and I ended up kind of at points being a little defensive of Star Wars being parodied. We thought, it was like this holy thing that you're not supposed to mock.
I think that's the best of the humor in Spaceballs plays on that exact thing, that the thing that it's parodying is presented so in a spirit of fun, but also with this very serious, mythic gravity to it. And that's why May the Schwartz Be With You is so funny. There's nobody named Schwartz in these films.
Yes.
There were some times, I think there were maybe 2 times, and I can't remember what they were, but one definite time when I laughed and laughed and laughed very hard at something. And no, I don't know if you remember what it was either, but I remember there was one thing that got me, it really got me. And there were times that I giggled and chuckled. I'm not saying it was, the whole way through, but it wouldn't be a movie that if I saw it now with no context at all about, childhood or whatnot, I would see it now and be like, oh, this isn't going to do very well.
Now, see, if I imagine watching Spaceballs with if I had never seen Star Wars or had any context to that, and I'm watching Spaceballs, I might think it's a work of genius then. If there was...
I think the more context taken away from you, the better.
The more I love the thing. It's great.
Yes.
Among the things that I think still work very well about it are the opening moments, the parody of the Star Wars crawl, Chapter 11. If you can read this, you don't need glasses. I remember that stuff getting great laughs in the theater, and that stuff is still very good. And then, of course, I would say classic opening shot that parodies the classic opening.
It's great.
With the just endless spaceship.
It's really well done. I also, from the moment I read it until this day, still love Unbeknownst to the Princess, but knownst to us.
Knownst to us. Yeah.
that makes me very happy.
Yeah, that's great. Some of the sort of obvious and literal wordplay that now is pretty eye-rolling stuff. I remember being sort of amazed by it at 10. Humor like jam the radar, comb the desert. A lot of the humor is about that. We're just going to make literal the most obvious pun on what's been said.
Yes.
And now it's like, oh, wow, they really went to all that trouble to make these giant ace combs so they could comb the desert. But I did find that hilarious. And
oh no, I loved it. And speaking of which, as an aside, the guy who says, "We ain't found shit."
Yes.
That's Tim Russ, who also plays Tuvok in Star Trek Voyager. He's the Vulcan on Star Trek Voyager, and the guy with the hair pick in the desert.
So he's been a Spaceball and a Vulcan.
He has been both a Spaceball and a Vulcan.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think the home video scene we're at now. Everything that's happening now is happening now is sort of, that's great comedy.
It is fantastic. I think it's probably the best thing in the film. And in fact, I occasionally reference it when I'm talking to kind of nerdier types during tea ceremony when we're introducing things and I'm explaining the concept of being in the moment. Like in the immortal words of Colonel Sanders in Spaceballs, we're at now.
Colonel Sanders, that made me laugh. That's lazy.
Yeah.
That made me laugh hard.
I feel like the fact that they just waited till halfway through the movie to punch that line makes it work somehow.
It made me laugh.
Yeah.
Colonel Sanders is played by George Weiner, and I just read in preparation for this discussion that Mel Brooks had this very ambitious casting plan for Spaceballs, a lot of which didn't work out. He wrote Colonel Sanders for Steve Martin, and you can kind of tell if you watch it with that in mind. George Weiner does an excellent job, but he was thinking of Steve Martin. He also offered the role of Lone Star to Tom's Cruise and Hanks before giving it to Bill Pullman.
Tom Cruise.
I think if he was thinking, we'll put the blockbuster leading man in our parody of blockbuster movies,
I suppose.
But Bill Pullman is, I think, a far better choice.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, like, having watched it, because I guess I saw it a couple of times, maybe in my 20s or something, but I haven't seen it for a while. And watching it now, I'm just like, this is the first time where I think Lone Star is kind of cute.
Well, okay, so who do you think would have been do you think Pullman's the best, or do you think between Bill Pullman, Bill Paxton, and Jeff Daniels?
Jeff Daniels?
Who would have done it? Well, they're all the same. I think Pullman probably walks away with it.
I think Pullman does a great job.
He does. He's got just enough of a Harrison Ford-like quality in the role to sell the parody. Lone Star is kind of Han and Luke in the Spaceballs universe. Mm-hmm. He does a great job, and I think most of the principal cast does. It's a little bit noteworthy that there's so few Brooks regulars, and I think this was the first Mel Brooks movie that really felt like he was moving on from the old ensemble. One of the things that made the early ones so great was how comfortable this kind of stock company had become. Madeline Kahn and Harvey Korman, Gene Wilder, lots of people who popped up in all his films. Dick Van Patten, who plays King
Roland.
Yes. He's kind of a regular. He had been in High Anxiety, and he was in some of the later ones too. But the only real Brooks player, besides Brooks himself, is Dom DeLuise, who provides the voice of Pizza the Hut.
Yes, right. Which, apparently playing Pizza the Hut. Now, Dom DeLuise was not in that costume. But apparently there were a couple of guys, one of whom apparently, I don't know if he quit the movie altogether, or if he just said, no, I'm not getting back in the Pizza the Hut costume. But basically, they were using real pizza, and so it was like it was just a guy in this thing, and they were like blow drying it in these heaters to melt all the pizza stuff, and so it was just burning up in there.
Bro.
And is that Robert Stack as his assistant?
It's actually Rudy DeLuca, who worked on the screenplay with Brooks, and Rudy DeLuca and Ronnie Graham are both kind of Brooks's late period collaborators. Okay. I think they worked with him on all the films from Spaceballs onward. That guy is playing a kind of Max Headroom like character.
Right. Yeah.
For the kids.
The Max Headroom TV show, by the way, is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life.
It's one of my favorites. I love it.
It's beautiful. I mean, it takes place 20 minutes in the future, and you cannot make me happier than that.
There are some comic legends in Spaceballs who are no longer with us. Joan Rivers is the voice of Dot Matrix, the C-3PO-like maid sidekick of Princess Vespa. She does a nice job. My favorite of her lines is, "Ooh, I hate these movies," during an intense chase scene. And John Candy playing Barf, the Chewbacca-like dog sidekick to Lone Star.
He's very endearing as Bartholomew.
Bartholomew.
Yes,
He always is.
totally.
And putting John Candy and Rick Moranis in the movie seems like Brooks kind of nodding to post-Brooks developments in comedy at the time.
Yes. By the way, I read that Joan Rivers was not originally supposed to be playing Dot Matrix. The person that did the body of Dot Matrix was supposed to actually play her voice too, but Brooks didn't really like her performance during the production, and so then kind of called Joan Rivers and asked her to voice over Dot Matrix.
Isn't that, except for the Joan Rivers part, exactly what happened with C-3PO?
No, because that's the opposite of what happened with C-3PO. They were going to do a voiceover with C-3PO, but because I mean, and really, when you look at C-3PO's lines in Episode 4, you can see it. He was originally written to be kind of like a used car salesman character, like this kind of oily, sort of, like maybe have some kind of a more gruff voice or something. And Anthony Daniels was just there because he was really skinny. But by the end of it, everyone was used to him being this prissy little Brit that loves M&Ms. And they're like, all right, we'll just make C-3PO gay.
That's what I read. That's exactly.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened. True facts.
And of course, the entrance of Daphne Zuniga.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who with Phoebe Cates and a couple of other people ran the table in the 80s.
Yes. Who is in Labyrinth?
Jennifer Connelly.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A bunch of
the raven-haired beauties of the 80s.
Yes. A bunch of pale brunettes that took all my parts.
Yeah, Princess Vespa. We get the headphones joke that just couldn't be left on the table. Also, the Druish princess joke, which I think is one of the better jokes in the movie. And that's another example. I so specifically remember when I was 10, I had never heard the phrase Jewish princess. I didn't know what that meant. But I still got and loved the joke.
Yeah.
So we need a Druish princess, like even without really getting the cultural reference of it.
She doesn't look Druish.
Yeah. There are moments like when she, takes out that line of Spaceball stormtroopers that feel like what used to pass for a kind of feminist moment, but now is rather cringy.
Yes. Yes. She does have a nice bassy singing voice, though.
She's a bass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there are more little funny things in the movie than are necessary to rescue it from the things about it that are obvious or embarrassing or hacky or just kind of gross. As with a lot of Mel Brooks stuff, there's like these kind of pretensions to higher comedy, like referencing Kafka's Metamorphosis, but not in a meaningful way. Just enough. Just enough for you to laugh. Like, yeah. Oh, that's a literature joke.
And half the people laugh really loud, so everybody knows they got it.
To let everyone know they got it. And the way Mega Maid is a transformer and sets up the Planet of the Apes reference. And of course the John Hurt cameo.
Oh yeah, which is one. Oh no, not again.
And the fact that he's credited as John Hurt.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that he's credited as John Hurt.
John Hurt plays John Hurt. It's brilliant, and I love that man so much. There's not really anything he could have done that would have made me not love him, and that saved so much of this movie for me. There's a really, really hardcore Alien reference that I only saw this time. Do you remember, Noah? And it's something opening its mouth next to a face. It was
yes.
Sigourney Weaver.
Right, it's that.
That before.
I don't remember when it was, but yes, there is something that mimics the classic shot from Alien.
So they're looking at us and then suddenly there's like this, whatever it is. Anyway, I'll have to go back and find it, but everybody can look for that when you finish listening to us and go run to watch Spaceballs.
Which, if you're not doing already, what's wrong with you? You should be watching Spaceballs now.
Well, no,
but, so another little Easter egg thing is that the in that outside of the restaurant where that scene happens, the Millennium Falcon is parked there.
Yeah, I saw that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's the only musical number, I think, other than that that song that the alien sings after bursting forth from John Hurt's innards. Other
Which
than
is
that,
the same song sung by the Frog in Warner Brothers cartoons, right?
yeah, and it's
He does that thing, the same thing.
Hello, my honey. Hello, my baby. Hello, my ragtime girl. Send me a kiss, my wife.
It's the only Mel Brooks parody that doesn't have a big production number in it.
That's true. Yeah. That said, the score for Spaceballs is kind of surprisingly impressive on its own.
It is. It's written by John Morris, and it has a kind of it's a very good John Williams sound-alike.
Yeah, but I mean, it also manages to be kind of, you know, silly and goofy in a way that is appropriate for the film, and it just is sonically pleasing. I really like listening to the soundtrack or the score from Spaceballs. I like it.
George Lucas was a fan of Spaceballs. He loved it. Mel Brooks helped his cause a little bit by hiring Lucasfilm to do the post-production work on the movie for $5 million. So George Lucas had an extra reason to be happy about it. Lucas's one stipulation was, you know, you can make this film, but he would not allow Brooks Films to do any merchandising. He said, don't make action figures because your Dark Helmet action figure to a kid is going to look just like our Darth Vader action figure. And so that's why there was really no extensive Spaceballs merchandising, which is kind of funny because one of the best jokes in the movie, I think, is when one of Mel Brooks's two characters that he plays, Yogurt, just plain Yogurt, reveals that what he does in his secret temple is merchandising. And that's, I think, a very happy sequence, revealing all this. Spaceballs, the coloring book, Spaceballs, the flamethrower. We put the picture's name on everything.
I kind of wish that, you know, maybe they would negotiate again and let's have some Spaceballs materials made and give all that money to you know, a worthy cause. Because I would buy Spaceballs the bath towel. I would buy Spaceballs the toilet paper. I would buy.
Was it every bit of merch, or was it just the action figures they didn't want?
I think it was a general ban on Spaceballs merch.
Well, I guess these are just pirated, like Spaceballs shirts and stuff.
Maybe there was a little, or maybe there were certain, you know, standard items that were allowed, and maybe there have been licensing deals, you know, post facto that the rules have relaxed or something, but I think basically there was no merch for that reason. Any final thoughts on Spaceballs before we move on?
Do we want to talk any more about Yogurt, or?
I
thought that would be a bigger topic of discussion. But.
It's very much like Blazing Saddles. In Blazing Saddles, Mel Brooks casts himself in two roles. He's the corrupt governor of the state, and he's also one of the natives. And so here he really does the same thing. He plays himself. He plays Yogurt in heavy makeup, and then he also plays the corrupt official, kind of the Groucho role, as President Scroob. Scroob being an anagram for Brooks. He's great. I always like seeing him on film. He's a sort of a master class in a certain kind of shtick comedy. And Yogurt, that too, making Yoda basically the 2,000-year-old man, a New York Yiddish-inflected old Jewish man. Yeah, that's inherently funny to me.
I mean, I guess the last thing I have to say about Spaceballs is apparently the original title before they came up with Spaceballs was Planet Moron.
Yeah.
And I don't know how true this is, but I think they were didn't like that title, were tossing it back and forth, and they knew space should be in the title, and they were saying space this, space that, and then someone or something spilled something on Mel Brooks, who stood up and said, "Balls!" And they're like, "Oh, Spaceballs!"
That I did not know.
Well, I don't know if it's true. There were a few sources that said that, but I haven't seen any video of Mel Brooks or anyone saying anything like that. So
I have heard that the movie Morons from Outer Space came out in the interim and made Planet Moron a less viable title. I
It's
do
such
think
a shame.
Planet Moron is an even worse title than Spaceballs. It's not a great title, we must admit.
And I also just want to say that possibly my favorite line from Spaceballs and maybe any film in the mid '80s is "Evil will always triumph because good is dumb."
Yeah, that is a classic line.
Yeah.
My good friend Trav SD has written a very compelling essay about Spaceballs on his blog Travelanche, which is essential, by the way, for pop culture vultures. You should look it up. It's at his site, which is travsd.wordpress.com. His essay is called Vaudeville versus Wagner, the Genius of Spaceballs. And he talks about having warmed up to Spaceballs on recent rewatch after not thinking much of it in its original release. And before we leave Spaceballs and move on to some of these other smaller spoofs, since you're the only one who has seen much of it, Marc-Anthony, will you just tell us a little bit about the Spaceballs animated series? I started to watch one episode of it, and I just
I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry.
Tell me something.
No, I mean, I know not much more than you do because my reaction has been similar. I've tried to watch it on, I think, maybe 3 occasions, and that in and of itself is miraculous. It is assaultingly vapid and just almost unwatchable. Or genuinely unwatchable. It's just unwatchable.
Best left forgotten.
I really think so, yeah.
There has been some talk occasionally about a Spaceballs sequel. In the movie, there's a reference to a movie called Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money.
Right.
Rick Moranis talked about a sequel tentatively called Spaceballs 3, The Search for Spaceballs 2.
Oh, that was Rick Moranis. I thought that Mel Brooks came up with that.
Oh, maybe it's been thrown around in various interviews, but I think
Okay.
I think the window's probably closed on more Spaceballs.
Well, no, I do believe that Brooks said he was interested in making another Spaceballs sometime around when The Force Awakens came out.
Yeah, I remember him saying that around the time the prequels came out, too.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So I think it's unlikely, partly just because it's so expensive. If Mel Brooks is going to make one last movie, I don't think it's going to be a multi-million-dollar, big-budget special effects extravaganza. Mel Brooks celebrated his 93rd birthday, I believe, last week.
Happy birthday, Mr. Brooks.
I'm sure he's watching, so happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mr. Brooks. And you know, here's a question for Mel Brooks. Star Wars character or sea creature? Flestic Krupp.
Repeat it.
Flestic Krupp.
Mel Brooks would probably say something like, that was my Torah portion at my bar mitzvah.
That's a Star Wars character.
It is a Star Wars character. It's a Rhodian arms dealer.
All right. Well, Spaceballs is the giant mountain of Star Wars parody, but there are so many of these, and particularly in the era of YouTube and the number of pop culture tributes that pop culture itself has perpetuated, we could not possibly offer a comprehensive look at Star Wars parody, particularly on the internet. But we will mention a few that are particularly noteworthy. We talked about Hardware Wars before. What do you guys think of the Vader sessions?
I love the Vader sessions with all my heart. Like I want like a high definition, perfect transfer, great sound quality version of the Vader sessions that I can maybe use as like an alarm clock. Like I would like to wake up with the Vader sessions every day. And we'll go do interviews. I want to, yeah, I love the Vader sessions.
When I first saw the Vader sessions, I laughed. I don't remember. I mean, I laughed so hard all the way through. This time, it took me a little longer to get into it, but then I remembered I always, no matter what, no matter how boring it seemed to be or no matter how many times I watched it, when he gets to the part where he says, in 1924, I posed for another statue. And it's just like, that was but it's somehow, I told Noah this time around, it seemed to be making light of James Earl Jones' position as a civil rights leader in entertainment. somehow.
And will you, just for in case there are any of the legions of viewers at home may not know, Amanda, will you just summarize what the Vader Sessions is?
Yes. So the Vader Sessions, someone took bits of a movie, Star Wars, and instead of James Earl Jones' real lines coming through, they took James Earl Jones' lines from other movies, and not even just lines, because there was a second set of Vader Sessions, and those people really were trying to craft their own script. The first Vader Sessions were so admirable was because they took long chunks of his dialogue and mixed it in with other people's, and really didn't manipulate the reaction shots that much. There were a couple of times, so they really put these this voiceover in. So essentially, you're watching Darth Vader saying things from Raisin in the Sun, and all sorts of other, and Field of Dreams, and sometimes it's incredibly funny. And I have no idea where the quote that I think is so funny came from. About I posed for a sculpture in 1924, but it's I don't think that's meant to be funny, but
no, but the Vader Sessions are great.
It's a wonderful idea, and yeah, it's real wish fulfillment for anyone who's ever wanted to hear Darth Vader say, "Baseball, Ray."
Your mama's going on a date. And then the part where he says you get the woman, get her in a nice bath. Somebody comes in and interrupts them. An Imperial guy comes in and interrupts them, and then he goes, even if she doesn't need it, whether she needs it. They did a really good job of cutting this audio in.
It's really true, and the whole idea of Darth Vader speaking colloquially is automatically funny. The fact that it really is his voice in a way, it makes it's quite good. And it was also one of the first viral videos that I was really aware of. One of the first times, not the first by any stretch, but it was an early example of everybody I know saying, "Oh, you got to see this!" And as soon as you showed it to them, you knew that they would laugh and laugh.
We saw on YouTube that it was posted 13 years ago. Is that right?
2000.
Criminy!
Yeah.
Oi! Oi! That gets me right in the mortality.
When we were 5.
Yeah. Oh, yes. All right. Well, that's the Vader Sessions. We talked about the Bill Murray lounge singer piece.
We did.
But Saturday Night Live has been to the Star Wars well many times.
Quite a lot. Many, many times.
We just today, after being reminded of it by Marc-Anthony's Facebook post, took another look at Undercover Boss, Starkiller Base.
Yes, which is, I think it might be my favorite SNL Star Wars thing there is, period.
It might be my favorite Star Wars anything outside of it. It's so good.
So this is a parody of the show Undercover Boss, where a boss undercover interacts with his employees and finds out what they really think of him. Adam Driver was hosting SNL and plays Kylo Ren pretending to be a radar technician named Matt, going undercover at Starkiller Base.
Matt straight up sucks.
I heard Kylo Ren has like an 8-pack. Kylo Ren is shredded.
Yeah, it's quite good. And it plays on the fact that Kylo Ren is by far the most mockable of the new Star Wars characters because he is by far the most serious and self-important.
And when as I told Noam, I think my favorite part is when she goes, "I haven't had my muffin, Matt."
Oh, Leslie Jones, yeah.
And then the second favorite is, "Oh yeah, I pretty much knew you're Kylo Ren when you sit on Matt."
To me, that sketch is a more successful version of another well-loved Star Wars parody, which is called Troops, which is a parody of Cops. It's the show Cops, but with stormtroopers on Tatooine. I feel that is extremely well done in terms of the way it's produced, the costumes, the production values. It's all very skillful, but they sort of forgot to make it funny.
Yeah, it's not terribly funny. It's more comfortable.
It's an extremely on-target parody of cops, and it uses Star Wars imagery and ideas with extreme fluency.
It might not be able to be funny because it is a parody of cops, and so you're going to have how much of a satire of domestic abuse can you make funny? Like it,
Yeah.
That's not going to be that funny. And chasing down a group of people that you always chase down about this certain thing, that's not going to be funny. It's difficult. And there are these guys all in white suits. If you're going to do that, like, let's make that point, But, but
and they're also literally called stormtroopers, like it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to laugh at some of that.
Agreed.
In the one thing that does remind me of is the film work of Kevin Smith, Kevin Smith's early films, like Spaceballs, they came out during those dark years when nobody was talking about Star Wars, and made talking about Star Wars seem kind of cool at a time when it really wasn't. I'm thinking of in Clerks, the famous debate about whether independent contractors were unjustly murdered when the second Death Star was destroyed. That is very good
and
stuff.
then we now know that they were Geonosian Hmong people.
That's right. That sort of changes the whole thing, doesn't it?
And in Dogma, one of the best lines of all time, which I can't say off the top of my head, but you can. I'm Han Solo, you're Chewie.
Oh yeah, right. It's
we're in
like
that fucked up bar.
Yeah, yes. Kevin's, except for a little bit in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, in which there is a Mark Hamill cameo and a pretty blatant Star Wars parody sequence. Those Kevin Smith efforts don't really satirize Star Wars, but they do use Star Wars for humorous effect, and perhaps deserve a mention here, as I think does the short film George Lucas in Love.
Mm-hmm.
George Lucas in Love is not a parody of Star Wars. It's a parody of Shakespeare in Love. But it's, I think, quite charming, and it uses, it fictionalizes George Lucas's college experience and imagines over the course of about 10 minutes where he might have gotten some of his ideas from. You guys like
struggle?
Right.
Yeah, George Lucas in Love is really cute.
I remember that one going around, and I remember liking it a lot. It's just, it's cute. It's a compact little capsule of little fun.
Yeah.
And since we like it, we can recommend it. And I might as well say that it was written and directed by Joe Nussbaum, and his co-screenwriters were Timothy Dowling and Daniel Scher. Also, the Vader sessions, I'll retroactively tell you, Stephen Fraley is the man responsible for those. So these are all worthwhile works. George Lucas in Love, not strictly a Star Wars parody, but a very charming and very funny Star Wars referential work.
So how about, have you seen the Lando and all the black people in the galaxy sketch?
No, tell me about it.
It's Lando Calrissian and the other 5 black characters in Star Wars. Having a convention where it's like just a vast empty convention with a couple of people scattered throughout. And this was on Saturday Night Live. And Glover played him and everything. It was delightful.
Oh, I didn't see it. I'll put that on my list.
Billy D. Williams is 83.
Is he really?
Yes.
I'm going to get me some Colt 45. I guess that helps you stay young. Mm-hmm.
I know. He looks amazing. He looks like he's in his 60s.
Go Billy D.
I'm looking forward to seeing him back in that role in episode 9.
That will be nice.
Sitting behind the controls of the Millennium Falcon again.
I know.
Sadly.
But no Nin Num that I can see. Dang it. Muhari.
I know that Star Wars has been parodied a lot, by the good people at Robot Chicken. I haven't waded into the waters of Robot Chicken myself for no reason other than I just haven't ever gotten around to it. Anybody know anything about that?
I mean, I have watched some of the Robot Chicken, and I watched the Star Wars things specifically, and what I found is that that sense of humor just really doesn't do it for me. So I can't really comment on whether I don't like it. Sorry, Seth Green. You're cute, but sorry.
Yeah, we no problem with Seth Green, but we just
no delightful chap.
And we watched, Amanda and I, earlier today, a compilation of Star Wars references from The Simpsons, which has certainly had its fun with Star Wars over the years.
I think you could pretty much say every animated adult cartoon in the past, has had at least one Star Wars episode. Many references. I mean, if you want to go to Family Guy, which is a show I cannot stand, but
let's not, yeah.
Have at it, I'm sure they have it. Everybody does it.
Yep.
Everybody does some sort of breath joke, like, the breathing joke that Rick Moranis does. People do that all the time. It's just they're little pieces in everything you see all the time.
As far as a general comedy show taking Star Wars on as a sort of special episode approach, my favorite example of that is an old example from the original burst of Star Wars mania, but it would have to be The Muppet Show. Also, perhaps my favorite television show of all time. There was an episode of the original Muppet Show, I'm of course talking about the original show, where Mark Hamill, along with C-3PO and R2-D2, were the guest stars, and they most memorably guested on a Pigs in Space sketch. The Muppet Show is one of those places where the bar for humor is just different, and a lot of the actual lines in that Pigs in Space sketch, if you quoted them out of context, they would sound too lame for Spaceballs, but it is delightful nevertheless to watch. And Gonzo as a Darth Vader-like character is delightful. And that's another childhood thing. When I was a little kid, the idea of Star Wars and the Muppets all in one place, is too delightful for words.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful thing that I remember loving as a kid, and as I watched it as an adult, have loved it just as much. And tangentially, the Star Wars stuff in Muppet Babies was also tons of fun. I remember, Gonzolo.
Yes, I remember that too.
Kermit Skyhopper and Gonzolo and Princess Piggy.
Princess Piggy. How did they come up with that one?
It's really clever, isn't it?
So anything else? What anything we haven't touched on?
Well, I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead, Amanda. Sorry.
There's tons of references in South Park. I mean, obviously. And they had one whole episode called Obama Wins, and it during which Cartman, Disney buys Mickey Mouse. He tries to extort Mickey Mouse in order to play Luke Skywalker's son in the next episode. That's a very special episode of South Park. And then there's also in Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls, one of my favorite parts is when Mr. Hanky's about to die. Mr. Hanky the Christmas poo, and he beckons Kyle.
Thanks for that clarification. I wasn't sure.
And then he tells him to come closer, and then he says, "There is another Skywalker," before he dies. That's definitely there. It's one of my favorite.
I'm really fond of the Star Wars bad lip reading videos.
Oh, bad lip reading, yes.
They are lots of fun. I mean, the seagulls thing is a piece of Dada genius, really. And Waiting in the Bushes of Love is a weirdly moving song. I really dig it.
I've not watched Star Wars bad lip reading.
You haven't? Well, I guess after this, please dig in.
Very well. Maybe I'll leave you good. Bye.
As with the Vader, bad lip reading is just kind of an ingenious premise.
Yes. Okay, so Star Wars character or brand name horror makeup product.
Okay.
Graftobian.
Say again.
Graftobian.
No, I'm not going to this one.
I'm going to go with Star Wars character.
Nope, that's theatrical sweat or
I'm
tears.
not good at this.
Phison Gore.
Star Wars character.
Yes, it is a Star Wars character. Melpax.
A horror product costume.
Yeah.
Horror makeup.
It's a fake blood company. Telesis 5.
Star Wars
Yeah.
character.
No, it's a silicone adhesive.
This goes to show you.
So, Amanda, what did we get in terms of our...
Not much this time. 10-year-old boy. They said that about 50,000 times, but I only had it in there once. It's not really satire, was something I'd written. And you said that about George Lucas in Love. Some of the things you did not get, because I had a very hard time this week because we were talking about all these other pieces.
It's a pretty broad thing, yeah.
And not Star Wars itself, and there were little bits and pieces I thought you'd talk about. So some things that are, I'm going to retire this now because one thing that's been on it every time you got last week was Ed Wood. Something that got retired last week as well was B-Movie.
I easily could have said either of those tonight. I tried, but
there are a couple that are going to stay on until somebody hits them. But just to show you what kind of trouble I was having tonight, Charlton Heston was someone. I thought you might say Matt's hot. Jimmy Carter, Take My Life, Please. Kelly Clarkson. I didn't know what they were doing under that sheet.
Oh, in Spaceballs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kept me awake at night when I was a 10-year-old boy. Mel Brooks under the sheet now I see that and I think, what indulgent, gross. We don't need that. But when I was a kid, what was he doing under there? I was mighty curious. Ditto Dr. Schlotkin when the lights go off in the nose job scene.
Right.
And his assistant, Beverly Hills. I may have had a higher tolerance for some of this at 10 than I do at 42. Yeah, go ahead.
I think some of the other, and then I thought somebody might say of something, it's better than episode 7. But no one said that.
In reference to Spaceballs?
Or anything we're talking about right now, yeah.
There is, this stretches the definition of parody a little bit, but there are 2 in-house Star Wars satire products that I think are worth mentioning. One is Behind the Dome, a series of Lucasfilm special features that take a VH1 Behind the Music approach to the fictional life story of R2-D2, who is depicted as an actor, a robot actor who plays R2-D2 in these movies. Those are quite amusing, and especially for...
Yeah, they're cute.
Stuff. It's pretty...
I loved it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's better than episode 7, but it was pretty damn good. It was better than episode 8 of Twin Peaks.
It's really pretty good. And he got, they got Francis Ford Coppola to talk about, how using R2-D2 in The Godfather, how he really wanted him to play Michael and all that stuff. Pretty well done. And then in another house, just before Arrested Development released its 5th season, there was a video giving Star Wars the Arrested Development treatment with Ron Howard narrating. This was around the time Ron Howard was working on Solo, which we're going to discuss in 2 weeks. That was rather clever, and it found there are more connections between Star Wars and Arrested Development than one might think, including just walking right up to the line of acceptability regarding brother and sister incest.
Yes.
Yes, which is something we don't talk about enough.
Not everything goes there, but Star Wars did by accident.
Star Wars and
if you really let yourself go into Star Wars and think about that, you think like they were attracted to each other and they wanted to kiss each other, but then they found out they were brother and sister. So what? That just goes away. Like,
apparently, though, that's a real phenomenon. Like, if you're people who are like closely related but are separated, and then when they meet one another, like they feel this strange connection that the only way they tend to interpret is through sexual attraction. Like,
sure. Yeah.
So I guess that happens a lot.
I just think I would feel terribly uncomfortable around my brother then forever, because I'd be like, well, clearly I was attracted to you, so now like I'm not now. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, he did eventually fly away and live on an island, so maybe there were issues.
It's true. It's true.
We're getting the sanitized version in these stories. Like, the real reason that Luke flew away was that...
Well, that's why you have to read the novelizations and stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It gets real hot. It gets real steamy.
Cartoons, I mean...
It's like Flowers in the Attic with explosions and spaceships and, like, fish people.
In the attic, no one can hear you scream.
Well,
on that note,
where do you think the future goes? We can close with that conversation. On one hand, Star Wars is now once again saturating our world. It would seem the time remains as ripe as it's ever been for mocking Star Wars. On the other hand, what is left to do, as you point out, Amanda, earlier tonight? It's all been done with regard to making fun of Star Wars. Is there anywhere to go? Is there anything you still would like to see in terms of making fun of Star Wars for fun and profit?
I think that a lot is going to depend on how they wrap this up in The Rise of Skywalker. I think that, you know, like say in the case of Lost, when nothing was answered, even though they told us it was going to be answered for 8 years, we spent our lives, we gave 8 years of our lives to this, JJ, and then they didn't answer anything. There were a lot of viral things that went around because of that. So I think that if we're satisfied, the more satisfied we are, the less we're going to make fun of it, obviously. But I think there will be a lot more, like, if they don't tie shit up or it's a stupid way to tie it up, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot more opportunities to make fun of it then.
The sacredness of Star Wars, it's always had this kind of holy aura about it. And I think the first and second and third generations of Star Wars parodists have capitalized on that to very good effect. Just kind of taken the piss out of something that takes itself so seriously and has this air of gravity about it. But everything, including Star Wars official productions, are now so tongue-in-cheek, and irony is so heavily layered into everything. I mean, the opening moments of The Last Jedi with Poe having that voicemail conversation with Hux, that's already funnier and more Spaceballs-like than anything in the original Star Wars trilogy, or certainly the prequels.
Well, it harkens back to Han talking to them and saying, "How are you? We're fine here. How are you?"
Yeah. There's always been humor in Star Wars. It's always been a pretty important element.
Well, but I mean, I think you could also argue, though, that Star Wars has kind of always been not exactly a parody, but I mean, it's certainly a cobbled together pastiche, which is fairly close to being, a humorous thing. It is intended to be kind of funny. So a lot of the parodies being parodies of a pastiche or of a parody itself is just already bizarre. But I think I agree with Amanda that it depends on how people react, and kind of the more negatively people react to Star Wars, the funnier material you can create out of it.
Yeah.
And if for some reason they end up loving JJ's ending, which, has he ever written an ending before?
I don't.
Has he ever had to do that?
I don't think he has. I think he says, "Oh, it's in my head. It's in my head."
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like if most people don't like that, or if they somehow end up loving it, then it will just be this, another kind of round of this is cherished holy stuff until the next generation pees on it.
Isn't there a sense that it's not? I mean, yes, Episode 9 will close off the Skywalker saga, and especially to all of us children of the 70s, that's a big deal, and that feels like a chapter is closing. But it's like they're gonna episode 9 will end the Skywalker saga, and then there's gonna be a Star Wars movie every 5 minutes for the rest of our lives.
Yes.
So it doesn't really feel like the thing is going away.
No, but I mean, it has. There's been less forward momentum than I think Disney initially imagined.
Yes.
And I think the poor ticket sales for Solo made them rethink the whole thing, because they had this giant slate of movies they were ready to make until that movie tanked, and now they're like, all right, we'll do a couple of TV shows and see how things go.
Aren't they doing a movie about what's his name from Rogue One?
They're doing a show about him, Cassian. Yes, and then there's also The Mandalorian. That'll be another live action show.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've heard about at least 2 new Star Wars trilogies, one from Rian Johnson and one from the Game of Thrones guys.
Yeah, but those aren't confirmed for sure yet, are they? Or they're still in talks for those, I think?
Maybe.
And I mean, I think what really makes me the most upset, just this is a tangent, but about the whole Solo thing, canceling a bunch of movies, is it was like we were really on the fast track to having a trilogy of Ewan McGregor Kenobi movies.
I would like to see that. I really would.
I would as well. I loved seeing him as Kenobi. He was one of the highlights of the prequels, and I want to see more of that.
Yeah. Well, your comments, Marc-Anthony, set me up very nicely to tease our next episode, which is 2 weeks from tonight. That'll be Sunday, July 21st, in which we return to the chronology of the canonical Star Wars films and discuss Solo, a Star Wars story. It comes next because we talked about episode 3 2 weeks ago. So please join us for our discussion of Solo. And as always, we invite you to join in the conversation if you watch live and chat along with us on YouTube. And we will respond to everything decent that you say to us.
Does anybody have any predictions for Solo?
For our discussion of Solo?
Yeah. Like when you watch it, anybody got any predictions for what's going to happen? I think it might suck.
I think it's going to be beautiful, and there will be Linda Hunt as a blinged out centipede with orphans.
Yeah. I think Amelia Clark's going to be in it, and we're getting into Katy Perry territory with me and her there.
I love that you think I know what Katy Perry territory is. I love that you think I know who Katy Perry is.
Katy Perry territory you don't want to go in with me.
Okay.
She's one step away from Reese Witherspoon. I mean,
right.
Putting me in the room with the devil.
And you prefer Reese without her spoon?
Yes. I want utensilist Reese.
That's okay.
Well, I predict that Solo, I predict I'll like it more when I rewatch it than I did. I think I've seen it once and then seen it a second time where I was only half watching it. But as is often the case with these films, repeat viewings you already know that you are generally, if it's a little disappointing overall, you already know that. So your expectations are tempered. And so you just notice all the little details and you notice the fan service. And I predict I'll probably enjoy Solo more when I rewatch it for our discussion in 2 weeks than I did when it was new.
I think I'm going to love it again. I've loved it every time I've seen it.
Oh, all right. I'm glad. Are you hosting the Solo episode, Marc-Anthony?
I thought actually Amanda was there. Is it me?
No.
Is it me? No. Oh, okay. I'll host it. Okay, I will do that hosting.
So that episode in 2 weeks will be hosted by Marc-Anthony Macon.
It will be. We'll see you then, kids.
All right. Well, if nobody has any final words, I will just point out that our entire schedule and all the information you need about Faces of Stone, including our vast archive of Star Wars and Twin Peaks: The Return discussions, is available on the World Wide Web at facesofstone.space. And if you're looking to get in touch with the three of us, you can find us all over the web and on all the various socials. But just to keep things concise, we'll give you our Twitter handles. Marc-Anthony is M_A_Macon. Amanda is president of CISC. And I am Noah Diamond on Twitter. Well, folks, are we ready to say goodnight to all our company? See you next time on Faces of Stone.
Stone.
May the Schwartz be with you.